I was born in near West Point, New York. My father was in the military, and I moved to California when I was about 3 or 4. I was raised in South Central Los Angeles, in the area called the Jungles. It's it's kind of like near Crenshaw, in between Crenshaw and La Brea, off of King Boulevard.
Okay.
It's just a community of apartment buildings, and I lived there until I was about 12, 13 years old.
What was that like?
Um, it was chaotic. There was always gunshots. There were always arguments, lots of drugs. People that are on drugs were like zombies walking the streets. Lots of violence. Everything that you can think of that is wrong with society was basically happening in that neighborhood.
What was that like as a kid? I mean, I guess you think of most kids, playing out in the streets or sports or whatever. What was it like for you as a child?
It was normal. If you don't know anything until you leave the environment and you see something different. My grandmother lived in Carson, and it was a very different surroundings, different environment. So, but still, this is where I grew up. I grew up in these type of environments, those type of neighborhoods. So it was normal for me until I was about in the 3rd grade, and I was going to school out in Pacific Palisades. And I started to understand that the area that I was living in wasn't normal. There was a huge difference in the neighborhoods and the houses and the way that the kids were raised in that neighborhood. So it was a huge culture shock for me.
Mm-hmm. How old were you when you started going to school there?
I want to say it was the 2nd grade.
So you started going to school from, you said around 7 in Pacific Palisades, and then you talked about how was it age 12 that you decided to run away? Is that right?
My home life was a little all over the place. My father had left. He was wrapped up in that crack epidemic, and my mother, she was a single parent, trying to figure out everything. My father was the breadwinner for the family, and she had to find a job. My mom was a housewife for most of my life at that time, and she had to find a job, and she had to try to figure out how to do the best thing for both of her children. And there was a lot of stuff, a lot of depression, a lot of mental illness that she didn't really understand, because that wasn't something that was talked about in our family. Even in that generation, there's a huge difference between then and now, where now we talk about self-care, we talk about trauma. My mom suffered a lot, and that reflected on me. She was always upset. There was some physical abuse. There was some verbal abuse, emotional abuse. I felt neglected. So I started to run away every time things got a little too bad or too hectic.
You would run away often?
Yeah.
For how long each time?
It start out for 1 day, and then it would be 3 days, and then it would be a week.
Where would you go?
Just in the streets. I would sleep in the laundromat and in apartment buildings, abandoned apartment buildings, in cars, in garages, wherever.
What would that be like when you'd come back home?
She'll be mad, so it wouldn't be any difference. It was just, I just have a moment to breathe and not really deal with the situation that was going on at that moment. And didn't make anything any better, just made things worse. But I just had a little bit of freedom.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about one of these times that you did run away,
Yeah.
something happening that maybe changed the course of the rest of your life?
Yeah.
If that's correct in saying?
There's a laundry list of things that happened, but I got in trouble at school. I knew that my mother was going to be furious when I got home, and I didn't want to deal with it. So I decided to leave home. I picked up my brother from school, dropped him off at the house, wrote a letter, made sure he had something to eat, and I left. And I started walking around. I just didn't know where I was going. I stayed in the area, never left the area. And probably about 12 o'clock, midnight, a guy pulled up and it started to rain. So he was just like, you okay? And I'm like, I'm fine. Tried to, shrug him off and continue to walk. And, he pulled over again. He was like, well, you want to ride? I don't know where I'm going. So I didn't take the ride. So he said it was starting to rain. Won't you just at least come sit in the car until the rain stops? I was cold, I was wet, I was tired, my feet hurt. So I accepted his invitation. And he started just talking to me, asking me about my name and who I am and what do I like. And so I began to get a little more comfortable. And he noticed that I was still nervous. So he offered me some weed. Living in that environment, I'm used to drugs. I know that, crack is whack. I knew that alcohol makes you violent, and then I thought about weed. Like, okay, a lot of people that I know that smoked weed usually giggle or very chill, laid back. So I was like, okay, this is like an aspirin, or, something that's not that serious, even though I come from the dare say no to drugs,
Yeah, me too.
So it was like the lesser of the evils. So I accepted the invitation to smoke the weed, and I blacked out. It was laced with something. I didn't find that out until later when I had got drug test.
Wow.
And
Do you know what it was? What it was laced with?
it was a lot of stuff. So it was PCP, and wow. They said it was cocaine as well. So it was like a cocktail of things. And I blacked out, woke up, there was something that was dripping on my face, and I was kind of groggy. And as I'm coming to, I'm feeling pain. I'm feeling my face is numb. So then when I came to and noticed and looked around, there was a guy on top of me, and he was raping me. And I tried to scream. I tried to tell him to stop. And every time I did, I would just get punched in the face until I was, basically unconscious, And this would happen quite frequently. It seemed like it was for a year, but it was probably about a week or two.
That you were with him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was in an abandoned apartment building. I was chained up, so I couldn't leave. It's crazy because a lot of the clients that I talk to, they don't, they try to, well, a lot of people try to make people understand that it's not like that, even though my story started out that way. But the guy disappeared, and I was unchained. There's like a meme on Facebook that I see. There's a horse that's tied up to like a plastic chair. And, with his strength, he can leave. He can just walk and drag the chair. But because of the control, he decides not to. And that's kind of like how my situation was. I was unchained. I could have walked out the door. I could have, jumped out the window, whatever the case was. But I was fearful for my life. So I stayed put until I want to say he was a landlord. I'm not 100% sure. He came in and he asked me, what am I doing there? And I told him, look, I'm not telling you anything until you get me out of here. And so I literally crawled, because I wasn't able to walk. I literally crawled into the back of his car, and he said, where do you want me to go? I was like, just keep driving. So when night fell, that's when he pulled over at a laundromat. And there was this older Hispanic lady that came out, and she saw me get out because I didn't have hardly any clothes on. And she found some clothes. I guess, the people had left in the laundromat. So she gave me the clothes to put on, took me in the bathroom so I could clean myself up. And she went next door to a little liquor store, and she bought me a pair of flip-flops. And I just started walking. And a guy pulled up yet again, and he saw that I was beat up pretty badly. And he was just like, well, can I help you? Like, I'm not going to do anything. Can I help you? And I, being naive, I said, okay. And for the first, I want to say a week, he looked out for me. He tried to take care of me. And I didn't really tell him what had happened. I just told him I got beat up and I was raped. And his mother told us that I had to leave the house. So, we left and we stayed in a hotel. And I told him exactly what happened to me. And he was like, well, you've done it before. And started right back into it again. But it was a little different. He knew a guy that was a seasoned pimp, if you will. And he took him under his wing along with me. And he just started taking me places and telling me just to do whatever they wanted me to do. And I did that until I was about 14. I was maturing too fast.
How old were you during this time? If you say you turned 14.
Mm-hmm. I was 12 the first time I was trafficked. When I was picked up on the street and held, I was 12 years old. Yeah. So from there, I was just being taken to certain places to work in prostitution. And I guess the people that were buying me didn't want to see me anymore because I was maturing. Like, they wanted an underage girl. They wanted someone who was as close to a baby as possible. Once I turned 14 years old, like I said, I aged out of that ring and I started working the streets and working on the track, which is the areas that are usually known for prostitution. Figueroa in South Central Los Angeles is a hot spot.
To this day?
To this day. I've heard from a client's mother that it's been a hot spot for 30-something years now. I met 3 generations of women that have worked the same area, within the same family, a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter. But I worked, and at that time I started to learn the game. Left that guy. I was with many different pimps from the time I was 14 until I was 18 years old. Worked most of LA and started to travel out of state as well. And it wasn't until I was about 17, 18, still kind of foggy. I was brutally beaten by my pimp. I was almost killed by him. Woke up in the hospital. And I couldn't remember who I was, couldn't remember my name till a couple days later. The nurse, a little Jamaican lady, she took care of me. She stayed with me for 2 weeks.
You were in the hospital for 2 weeks?
Yes. I was a Jane Doe, and once I remembered who I was, I told her. She told me, don't tell anyone who I am, because the pimp was able to find me if I was a Jane Doe, for one, or for two, if I had my name there, or DCFS, when it came and got me, or whatever.
What was that?
DCFS, Department of Family Children Services. Children Family Services. And so she gave me a fake name, and she changed my room number.
Wow.
And she just looked out for me until I was well enough. She gave me a bag of hygiene items, and I left the hospital with bruises and stitches. And I started to victimize myself by still engaging in prostitution. But now I had a false sense of like empowerment because I wasn't under a pimp's control anymore. I was considered as a renegade, which is a woman who doesn't work for anyone. And I basically worked all around the U.S. I was traveling because I didn't know where I was going to go. I knew I couldn't stay in California anymore. So I ended up in Chicago, of all places, to feel safe. It was Chicago. The people were very blunt, very open. And that was a huge difference from the circle of people that I was surrounded by in California. And I continued to work for a little while. I started to, it was less prostitution. I started dancing because I was getting tired of having sex, basically.
I've heard some could say that that's like almost a little weaning process. Was that kind of the case for you?
Definitely. I didn't know what I was doing. It was just happening. And started dancing in a club. And one girl, she was like, well, you're very business savvy. Why don't you start working for yourself and doing private parties? So I was a little hesitant at first, but it was a little bit more independence. I was able to set up shows for clients. I had a full-on floor show. And so I enjoyed it. So it was less sex, more of just dancing. And then other girls wanted to work with me, and because they saw that it was very cut and dry. There was no goofing off, there was no sex, there were no games. I go in, take care of business, leave, go to the next show. And other girls wanted to figure out what my formula was. And so after that, once I made a certain amount of money, I was trying to slow down. Met my ex. I was living in his father's house. I was living on the upstairs of his father's house, and I met his daughter. She was adorable, and he had something that I wanted, which was family. So it wasn't the danger, being raped, being robbed, being beat up. All that stuff didn't make me stop. Every person has a why. My why was family. We got into the relationship. He had 2 other kids. And that's what helped me get out of the life, was love and hopes of having a family.
Wow. So you were still in the life when you met him?
Yeah.
And he knew that?
Mm-hmm. And he told me that there's no way that I could be around his daughter if I'm doing those things. So that helped me out a lot. So
did you know that you were a victim of human trafficking when you were in it?
No, I was a prostitute. I was sure of that. There was a lot of shame for years because, you hear the word prostitute, you think criminal. You don't think someone who was a victim of circumstances or of grooming in any kind of way.
There's often an unfair assumption from people that prostitutes are there by choice and they can leave whenever they want. And you're saying that that's not always the case.
Especially from where I'm raised. There wasn't too many role models and examples of what you can accomplish in the neighborhoods. The only time that we saw doctors or lawyers were either when we went and they didn't look like us, especially in the 90s and the 80s. There weren't that many black doctors or attorneys, and then, you see them on TV, but you wouldn't see them in the neighborhoods mentoring in schools or anything like that. A lot of people that were fortunate enough to get out of those neighborhoods didn't come back. And then what media portrayed as successful or those type of job roles, they didn't look like us. And we knew that we either have to be really good in school, or we have to have a love for knowledge and education. And if you didn't have that, then you have to be a drug dealer or in sports, or you'll find a man who is rich and will marry you, the whole pretty woman thing, Or a lot of women were in the area that were hustling. Were engaging in prostitution in order to make money. So it was yes, it seemed like could be a choice, but it was, they were victims of circumstances, especially when you're living in an impoverished neighborhood, you're willing to do whatever you can to get out of that. A lot of girls are coerced into prostitution through a boyfriend, which is, I think it's very damaging. I've never really had that type of relationship with a pimp or an exploiter. I knew what it was from the very beginning. I knew that I was underage. I couldn't get an apartment. I couldn't get a hotel room. I needed to have someone there in order for me to live, have somewhere to sleep. And then at those times, the pimps used to walk the streets, used to walk the tracks where the girls used to work. And if you're not attached to someone, then that can be problematic as well.
Meaning?
They could snatch you up.
If you weren't actually walking with another.
No, if you weren't represented by a pimp or representing a pimp, that will leave you very vulnerable to being kidnapped, or for them to come and harass you. If you're getting in and out of a car, or if you're getting in and out of a hotel, they know you have money. They can come and take that money from you because you're not under a pimp's control. Where if you are with a pimp, other girls talk, who are you with? Oh, I'm with so-and-so. Okay, then they will tell their pimp, okay, she's with him. And that will kind of take the attention off of you because you're being represented by someone.
Mm-hmm. Did your family or any friends know where you were at this time?
I didn't really have too many friends. I've always been a loner by nature. That was just how I was. My family didn't know. They knew that I was in the streets, but they didn't know what was going on. No one in my family really known about the prostitution until I was 17, 18 when I was leaving. I had called a family member and told them that I was in some trouble and that I needed some help. And, that family member was able to put two and two together. But no one really knew the extent of it until recently.
Wow. So you went that whole time and they didn't know?
No.
How do you think that is?
Well, when I was younger and I was working the tracks, when I wanted to get away from my pimp, I would go into the store, either before work, after work, whatever the case may be, and steal in plain sight. And I knew I was going to get arrested and go to juvenile hall. So that's the tactic that I used to get rest.
Wow.
Is to get arrested. A lot of people when I tell them that, they're like, oh, you're crazy. Who wants to go to jail? I did. It was either go to jail or be on the streets. And when you're working, in prostitution, there's no days off. There's no sick days. You know, us as women, we have certain periods where we're, you know, dealing with our lady issues. That didn't matter. You still had to be out there on the street day in, day out. Rain, you know, it could be cold, it doesn't matter. You had a quota that you had to make, and it had to be fulfilled every day. So, or if I was beaten by my pimp, I would leave, go to another pimp, or, you know, do something to where I can be noticed and I will be arrested. So I was either spending time with some girlfriends that I knew, that I met during the time that I was in juvenile hall or camp or placements, and or I would be in those juvenile facilities. So yeah.
Did you know a lot of the other girls that were also working with the pimps that you were working with?
Yeah. We really got to know each other once we got to juvenile hall.
So some of you guys would go at the same time?
No, not the same time, but we will see each other there. Within the time that I would either be sentenced to 3 months, or I'll have to go to boot camp, or I have to go to placements, group homes, and I would see those girls that I used to work on the tracks with. Or sometimes we would run away, you know, or the girls that I would see in the placements will end up on the track later on. So, yeah, a lot of them, we didn't see each other that often because of the type of, you know, stuff we were involved in. Some of them disappeared. I've heard a few of them were killed. Yeah, it's really sad to see that. One of the girls that I knew in the group home, we just met each other again, or just met up again last year. And the first thing we said to each other was, "You're alive. You know, you made it." Because a lot of girls don't come out of that life. I was in for 11 years, which is it's rare for me to be healthy. You know, I have no diseases that, you know, I didn't catch any diseases that I couldn't get rid of, I should say. I don't have any major injuries to where I'm handicapped or disabled in any way, which is, it's a blessing for me to be still a loving person, kind, you know, empathetic to other people, compassionate, despite everything that I've been through in life. So a lot of girls that I was in with, they're either gone. One of my friends, she's been missing for over 25 years.
Wow.
You know, I can't imagine her being tortured. I just hope that she's just passed on, you know, because her family has been looking for her for a very long time. You know, I can't even remember her last name. But it's situations like that which is very common, especially back in those days. There weren't any cell phones. There wasn't as much information with technology as there is now.
What did you say when we were first coming in? You said pagers and beepers or something?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is like the time of the internet, where then it was just pagers and payphones. So there's a huge difference in where technology is, you know, and where it was.
Mm-hmm. Were you living at home at this time, or were you living with pimps, or where?
For the most part, when I was in the life, I wasn't at home. I would only be home for a short period of time. I don't think I stayed with my mom for a year, you know, in and out, because I was usually in group homes, or situations were still bad at home, you know, probably not as bad as it was earlier on. It was just, I was so used to having freedom at that time. So just staying at home and having to deal with following rules, I felt like I was an adult. You know, I was doing grown woman stuff. You know, for me to live in the same house with my mom, it didn't make any sense for me.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.